This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, and this conference will now be recorded, which is great. I'm Darren, so we're from MBM and we're here to help you understand better. We're here for about 45 minutes. We can extend if you want to. It's roughly 20 minutes of Andrew doing a refresh on GSCOP, followed by 20 minutes of Q&A. So if you've got any questions ready, either interrupt him as you go, that's cool, or hold them till the end. The purpose of this is to make sure you guys get what you need on GSCOP because you're going through some tough challenges. All right. We've also got Sarah. Sarah, say hello. She's probably on mute. All right. Sarah's in the background running all the tech. Okay.
Hi guys, sorry.
Sarah's running all the tech for us. She'll put any links in the chat and she'll also record it so you guys can have it afterwards. Andrew, let's go.
Okay, right. Great to see you all again. I think Peter's the only one I haven't met before. Is that right, Pete?
I think I've been in one of your sessions before, Andrew, a couple of yees ago.
All right, sorry.
Maybe.
Okay.
I couldn't have made much of an impression, though.
No, when you see 40 people a week in non-lockdown conditions, you've got to forgive me. Right. You can see there on the slide. So I do obviously know all of you. Would love to spend a lot of time catching up with you because it's been a while, but you've got 30 seconds just to say hello, what you're currently doing, because I'm aware there's been quite a lot of changes at AG Barr over the past few months. So important for me to understand whether you're on a new account or not. So let's start. Vinny is on my immediate right, I think. So we'll go Vinny first, please.
I'm your right-hand man. Yes. So Vinny, I look after discounters and value retail.
Okay, and very quickly, I know you're on one of the previous GSCOP courses, but score yourself. 1, you can't remember a thing. 10, you're a bit of an expert.
Well, I haven't been in the previous course.
Okay, so
this is my first one.
So what's your level of understanding of GSCOP, do you think?
Bits and bobs here and there. So it'll now streamline it, or it'll just put everything in a context. So I refer if I'm doing anything, I just refer. So it'll be nice to know everything's there. I can refer it to.
Put you down as a 2 then. Stephen, you were definitely on one of the previous programs.
Yeah, I am. So, Stephen, I head up the Tesco and Booker business unit and have done since July last year. In terms of how confident, my notepad from your last course is somewhere in a drawer in the office, which is locked, so I can't get into it. So I'd say probably lower than it should be if I could have reread my notes this morning. And we've got a lot of conversations ongoing with Tesco at the moment, particularly with regards discounter pricing and some quite strong language being used. So I think that's why we'd ask for the refresher.
Yeah, no, the brief Darren got from Ian was very much about a lot of you guys are in terms discussions at the moment and wanted to understand how GSCOP may or may not be of help. Okay, give yourself a score, Stephen. 5, 4.
Probably about 5, 4 or 5.
4, 5. Okay, Lee, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. So I work on the Booker team, reporting into Gavin and Stephen. I was on the course previously, but I would still score myself at like a 2, if that. I think some things might come back to me, but about 2.
Okay, cool. Peter.
Yeah, so I've just recently moved on to Tesco team from previously looking after Unitas. I've not done the initial course before, so I would score myself pretty low. I'm sure there'll be bits that I'll know kind of informally, but not in this context, so probably 2 as well.
Okay, well, really important because Unitas not covered by the code. Tesco obviously very much covered by the code, so you do need to be pretty aware of it. So this will be useful for you. Kirsty, hello.
Hello, I'm Kirsty. I work on the Tesco team. I'm not very confident in this. The last time I did the training, I was in a category role, so it probably wasn't as relevant as for a trading role. So it'd be good just to refresh it from a trading point of view.
Okay,
so 3.
Okay, Hannah.
Yeah, hi. So I head up the e-commerce team, but I'm a month back from mat leave, so I've had a year out of the business. And Ocado and Amazon are in our pure play trading that I look after, and obviously Amazon aren't covered by GSCOP. Ocado only very recently are, so my knowledge on GSCOP is probably pretty low on both the element of being a year out of the business and the fact that Ocado only just kind of got enrolled in it recently.
Okay, so what score are you going to give yourself? Two, 3, like
Two.
everyone else?
2, I think. Yeah, I would say.
Thank you, and congratulations.
Thanks.
Stephen, very quickly.
Yep. I work in the legal team, and GSCOP is one of the many things that I try to stay on top of and advise the business on.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for those intros. Darren's introduced himself. Hopefully, I don't need much of an intro. If there's anything you need to know about me, want to know about me, ask it as one of the questions. But let's crack on. Okay, supposedly Darren was telling me earlier, people can read 7 times faster than I can speak, so I won't go through the agenda. Other than ask you, what's that picture on the right? Anybody want to have a guess? Anybody into their fine dining?
Salmon.
Smoked salmon.
It is salmon.
Smoked salmon.
What would a waiter call that when it came to your table?
Gravel axe.
And a move.
Oh, somebody said it. An amuse-bouche.
Boosh.
It's one of those little tasters that they give you to justify charging you 115 quid for your meal. And basically, that is just to say that GSCOP, if you want an in-depth knowledge of GSCOP, you can't do it in 20 minutes. So this is a taster, a refresher for some, a taster for others. I know Ian is committed to doing some more in-depth full-day GSCOPs with us once restrictions allow. So a bit later in the year, you will get some much more in-depth training and knowledge on GSCOP. Today can only be a taster, guys, I'm afraid. Okay, Darren.
Quick piece on getting the most out of it. So notepad, pens, keepers, grab what you need. Have you got something you can write on? Hopefully you'll come away with a single piece of paper, which will just be the 5 things that you want. That's what you're after from this session. So try not to grab the nearest post-it note and ram it all on a stamp or a post-it note. Try and put it on a keepers, hopefully. And then a place where you put it that you'll come back to next time. So it might be you have a one-to-one with Stephen or someone else. Andrew?
Okay, good. Right, this is what I'm going to attempt to do. Again, you can read it, but take you through a few of the main principles of GSCOPs, but particularly how it affects your interaction with your main customers. Some of the common misconceptions and mistakes that can be made around GSCOP that will help you in your day-to-day interactions. And probably the bulk of today is about what is known as the written supply agreement. A lot of people don't realise whether they have one or not with their retailers. You need to understand what is your written supply agreement, because it's the one document that either gives you protection under GSCOP or where you can sometimes inadvertently give away AG Barr's money when you don't need to, as a result of stuff being in what constitutes a written supply agreement. So probably the bulk of what we're going to talk about is how to understand what a written supply agreement is, and in these terms negotiations you're having, ensuring that the right stuff is put in there that works for you and stuff is not put in that could potentially work against you. As Darren said, I'm going to speed on because of time. Do shout if you've got any questions as I go. Right, we're going to do a quiz. So get yourself a blank piece of paper. 10 multiple choice questions. I'll read the question, let you read the answers. It's A, B, or C. Shout if you can't read or can't read one of the questions, or it's missed off the screen. So here we go. GSCOP covers which of the following? A, B, or C? Suppliers are in breach of the code only if A, B, or C. Which is the odd one out? Which of the following categories is not covered by GSCOP? And what does the term CCO stand for? Anybody need any more time? Shout.
Yeah, more time.
Everybody good?
No.
Yeah.
Yep, okay. 6. The name of the current adjudicator is 7. Which of the following can GSCOP retailers, GSCOP covered retailers, demand payments for? And which 2 retailers has the adjudicator made formal investigations into over the past 5 years? How much notice must you receive of a delist? A, B, or C? And which of the following are not explicitly covered by the GSCOP Code of Practice?
Andrew, have we lost Hannah?
I can still hear you.
Oh, cool. Okay, so we can't see you.
I don't know why my camera's gone off. I think maybe my internet just forces it. Sorry.
I can see Hannah. So great. Right. Everybody ready? I'm going to go through the answers now. Okay, let's go back one. Okay, GSCOP covers which one of those 3 guys?
B.
C.
No, it's now.
I said
Now,
C. I didn't know.
okay. It was B up till about 6 months ago. It's now C because TJ Morris trading as home bargains have been added, so it's now 13.
You need to update the handout on your website, Darren.
There's a next step, Darren. Right, suppliers are in breach of the code only if?
Never in breach.
Yeah, it's a very important point.
Yeah.
You as suppliers can never breach the code. Therefore, from a legal perspective, you don't have to worry. Only 13 named retailers can break the code. Okay, odd one out. Peter, I hope, gets this one.
I said A.
Oops, okay. How many people went for B?
Yeah, I did.
Why? Why?
It's not listed as the 13 retailers. I didn't know. Was my
Like
assumption.
this Booker or Nisa?
No.
Okay.
And I don't know. I was just lucky.
Okay, the code covers 13 named retailers and their wholly owned subsidiaries. So Booker is a wholly owned subsidiary of Tesco. It's covered. Nisa is a wholly owned subsidiary of Co-op. It's covered. Cost Cutter only have a distribution agreement with Co-op. Therefore, they're not covered. Co-op are covered. Cost Cutter aren't because they're not owned. So hopefully that's clear. Which category not covered by GSCOP?
Is it perfumes and
C.
It's perfumes and cosmetics. It's an interesting one. Toiletries aren't, so sort of antiperspirants are covered, but technically perfume and cosmetics aren't. What does CCO stand for?
Code Compliance Officer.
That's B. Okay, current adjudicator is C.
C.
Yeah.
Which of the following can a retailer demand?
B.
C.
C.
No, it's B. It's one of the few
B,
things.
yeah.
One of the few things that they can insist on is that for a pure new line, pay a listing fee.
It's in the Booker terms agreement.
Say that again, Stephen.
I was going to say it's in the book of terms agreements. That's I know.
Which two retailers has adjudicated made formal investigations into?
A.
Morrison's and Tesco.
Yeah, Tesco and Co-op. Although she has had a good look at Morrison's and Asda over the years, but formally just Tesco and Co-op. How much notice must you receive of the delist?
12.
Is it A?
Yeah.
12 weeks.
Okay, this is an interesting one. The adjudicator
C, isn't
sort of, it's C. She's sort of matured her advice, and I'll talk about it in a few minutes. Most of the industry defaulted to 12 weeks. But the adjudicator is now saying it should be determined on an individual basis. So I'll talk a bit more about that later. Which of the following are not explicitly covered by the code? What people got?
A.
A.
It's C, it's front margin. One of the important things about the code is there is nothing explicit around cost price. One of the reasons that in fact, all of the retailers are actually engaging and have engaged with the adjudicator over the last 5 or 6 years is that there was nothing to stop them using their market share buying power to drive cost prices down, as long as they're forward-facing negotiation. So front margin is not explicitly covered. Right, very, very quickly, just go quickly around the room. What did you get, Vinny?
5.
5. Lee?
5.
5. Stephen?
Which one?
What total? 5. Hannah?
7, but one of them was by luck, so I'll say 6.
I'll count.
7.
7. And Peter?
5, but most of them were by luck, so.
Yeah. I know.
At least we've got a fairly clustering in the middle around 5, with Kirsty and Hannah are 2 stars, if that's the right word. So well done. Everybody clear what the right answers were?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Then. Myths and misconceptions. Biggest misconception whenever I train this to groups is they think that competition law and GSCOP are the same thing. They're not. They're both administered by the Competition and Market Authority, but they're both totally different bits of legislation. I've already said, you as a supplier don't have to worry about breaching GSCOP. Only the buyers in 13 named retailers can breach GSCOP. Competition law, a totally different kettle of fish. You do need to be aware of competition law, because you as suppliers as well as buyers can breach competition. Haven't got time to go into it now, but any doubts or questions you've got, I think Stephen is probably the best person to throw those over to, because the penalties if you are in breach of competition law are pretty eye-watering. But GSCOP, you don't have to worry about, in the sense that you can break the code or break the law. Not all retailers and categories are covered, as I've just said. The important point there is wholly owned subsidiaries are covered, but not retailers who have supply agreements. So Morrison's at the moment busily building their distribution and volume with distribution agreements with lots of various people, petrol forecourt operators, Martin McColl's, Sandpiper on the Channel Islands. All of those companies are independent of Morrison's, therefore not covered by the code. Now, Morrison's could ask you for something that breaches the code for one of those distribution partners and would break the code. But if those distribution partners have their own buying teams, as Martin McColl's, for example, do, the Martin McColl bar technically can't breach the code because they're not covered and they're not owned by a GSCOP covered retailer. So be very clear, you know, particularly some of you with multiple accounts, whether it's a wholly owned subsidiary or just the distribution agreement. People are often surprised Amazon aren't covered. I think Amazon will be in the adjudicator's sites, and it's possibly only because the adjudicator, she was due to leave office on the 24th of June this year. She's just had that extended by 6 months because of COVID. Probably one of the first jobs in the intro of the new adjudicator will be, do we bring Amazon in? And I guess especially as a result of lockdown, given what will happen.
I'm part of.
Sorry, Hannah.
Andrea, I'm part of. I was just going to say I'm part of British Brand Groups. We have a meeting of e-commerce kind of get together to discuss whether or not we could push Amazon to be part of GSCOP. But the calculations that we put in to try and prove that it was above the threshold didn't go through, and so we tried to push for it to be included. I think a year and a half ago, and it wasn't. So it was being considered as part of the when Ocado got added in. But they're about to launch a new proposition for fresh, which could grow their business further, and hopefully that'll push them into it. I think, because I think there's a lot of things that they would need to change if they get made part of it.
And of course, given how well online retailers have just how much volume's gone their way during this lockdown, I imagine Amazon's food business is significantly bigger as a result of lockdown. So that would be another reason.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I would bet £5 of Darren's money they'll be the number 14th within a year.
Andrew, we had a conference call with Amazon, and they are concerned about GSCOP.
They should be, because there's a lot of things that I think fall without this that they currently get away with that they shouldn't really get away with. Yeah, so absolutely they'll have to reduce a lot of their profitability margins, I think, if they get made part of GSCOP.
And what will be important, Hannah, the minute you get wind of that announcement, is that start building the foundations so that your relationship with Amazon goes on GSCOP compliant footings from day one.
Yeah.
Okay. Last 2 points on this slide. I've already mentioned it. There's nothing in the code. One of the reasons that retailers have, if you like, played ball with the adjudicator over the last 6 years or so is that cost price reduction demands are allowed. As long as they're forward facing, so they're not retrospective, there's nothing to stop a covered retailer going at you for forward facing cost price reductions. Now they have to do it fairly, and they have to do it without duress, but essentially there's nothing to stop them having terms demand of you. And I'm pretty sure this is the way Tesco still works. If Kirsty and Stephen correct me if I'm wrong, but Tesco now have a very simple model. It's front cost price margin plus a growth overrider, and then maybe some bits and pieces around paying for promotional space or new lines. But when you're in a growth situation, as most of the covered retailers are, it works quite well having a front cost price and then a growth overrider. Drags your money in as your volumes grow. And certainly, Tesco, since their particularly horrible year in 2015-16, have done pretty well with that very simple term structure, which is fully GSCOP compliant. There's the 13. If you want confirmation, it was 10 originally. Ocado, B&M and Home Bargains were the last 3 to be added. But I said earlier, if there are wholly owned subsidiaries, if there are any, they are also covered. Right, let me talk briefly about the adjudicator. She was due to leave office 24th of June this year, but it's been extended for 6 months. She's been in place 5 or 6 years. And you'll have heard me, if you were on the previous courses, talk about the code being a little bit of a toothless watchdog. That was my opinion, because it had so many potential holes in it to allow retailers to wriggle through. And I think Christine, given her background, which is the Co-op Farming Group, she understood that if she just stuck to the letter of the code, she'd get very few phone calls or emails from suppliers complaining. and certainly in the last survey, the details of which are only up to 2019, 53% of suppliers said that they wouldn't complain because of fear of backlash from their customer. So half of suppliers concerned about bringing up a complaint because of fear of backlash. So what Christine's done very successfully is develop what she calls a collaborative approach. She works with both suppliers and with the retailers on issues that get brought up to her anonymously. So she samples opinion from people like British Brands. She samples opinions whenever she visits trade shows or the big farming fairs and what have you that typically happen over the summer. She gathers opinions and data anonymously. You are also fully within your rights to approach her directly anonymously. I'd suggest you do that via Stephen if you were to consider doing that. And she will approach either the relevant retailer or the group of retailers if she thinks it's an industry problem and she'll present it as an industry problem. There's 3 examples there at the bottom. She's provided guidance on things like payments for better positioning, delisting, hence the changes I alluded to earlier around moving from this nominal 12-week to a more individual basis, and things like forensic auditing. So she's had a lot of success with the code compliance officers discussing industry-wide problems and getting the retailers to agree to better working practices. So it's probably been the biggest success of her tenure. But what it does mean is that rather than you guys having to face making a formal complaint to the senior buyer of the category, so that would typically be the category director for impulse in most of your customers, and the worry that would go with that of having to put your hand up and make a complaint directly to one of your customers, there is a way of informally approaching the adjudicator and getting some sort of action if she deems it necessary. So you don't have to feel you're one of the 53% that are frightened of approaching your retailers. If you speak to Stephen, there is a way of that complaint, if you have one, being anonymised. Any questions?
What was the guidance on the payments for better positioning, please?
Okay, that's a really interesting one. This goes back to the Tesco investigation in 2016, where they discovered Tesco was demanding payments for hotspot positions and eye-level shelf, etc. And there was a famous story I've told some of you about the Tesco spices buyer that auctioned off the eye-level shelf during a range review. So Christine investigated that, and basically her first conclusion was demanding payments for better shelf positioning is absolutely against the code, and that was in her Tesco report. But that requesting payments or suppliers offering payments is very interesting. Her words were, breaks the spirit of the code. So you as a supplier, you as a supplier can offer to pay for things like better shelf positioning, branded bays, off fixture units. You can offer that yourselves, and I know your biggest competitor, the world's largest soft drinks company, does this. You can offer that and you can't breach the code. Equally, your code covered customers can request it as part of a terms and negotiation or a JBP. The adjudicator says it breaks the spirit of the code, but the way the code is written, the retailers can request it or you can offer it. Does that answer your question, Kirsty?
Yeah, does that apply to things like branded chillers then as well?
So say that again.
Would that apply to like branded chillers?
Yeah. So any I know you have done it. I think with Rockstar last year or whatever. A branded end where you pay for a branded end. or chillers in store or any sort of discretionary space, you know, you can offer that as part of your brand marketing plans. And I said, if you think about your, you know, the world's largest soft drinks company, it's exactly how they push their brand presence. They want their brand presence absolutely everywhere. They have chillers absolutely everywhere. And, you know, as part of their JBP discussions with their customers, it's exactly that.
Andrew,
And
does that
apply for
cover?
feature
Oh, sorry,
space as well? Sorry, Hannah.
it's gone.
Sorry, hang on, I've got 3 people. I think Hannah in there just first. So Hannah first.
I was just wondering if it applied to online sponsored items, which would go to effectively like the top of an online shelf.
Okay, that is a fantastic question. Stephen may know better than me. I don't think it's ever come up yet. So because Ocado are the only real pure play online player, Amazon not covered. I've not heard of any instance on any of the covered retailers' web operations where payment.
But for example,
if I can jump
all
in,
of the other mults are gone. Gone, Stephen.
She's clarified that the rule around not being able to require payment to secure better positioning or more shelf space, and I should say that one kind of important carve out to that is unless it's for a promotion. So we're just talking about a requirement for a payment for non-promotional better positioning space or more shelf space. She said that that rule applies to both bricks and mortar stores and websites. So it applies equally to the websites. And she's also said, taking one step further forward from that, that if a retailer has taken a payment from a supplier to position the products on the website and it's not promotional, they have to make that clear on the website. Now, I don't know, Hannah, I haven't seen any retailers having done that yet, but that's what she said. If the retailer's taken a payment for products not on promotion to be more visible on a website, they have to make it clear on the website, which I guess they would do for the way Google do it, like paid ad, paid for promotional space or something like that. But I haven't seen it. I haven't been looking for it, but I haven't seen it. But she did say that's what they need to do.
By and large, I think it's typically with promotional. It's linked with promotions. So, for example, in Ocado, they would you would always be asked to put something on promotion and then potentially also be asked for additional costs to sponsor it and bump it to the top. Typically, that's how it works, but there might be examples. I don't know.
Yeah, that's probably how they manage it and how they navigate it, because it's only for where they've taken the payment for a non-promotional.
Yeah.
So exactly as Stephen just said, payments for new line listings and for promotional space are allowed. Retailers can demand that. Anything else they can only request. And as we said, or as Stephen clarified, online also covered as much as bricks and mortar. Kirsty, still got your question?
That answers my question because it's about promotional feature space. Thanks.
Anybody else? Okay. Right, written supply agreement. The heart of any protection you may have under the code. This is the adjudicator's own survey for last year. The current one has literally just come out, but she's only published the headlines so far. That was up till 10 o'clock this morning anyway. So this is last year's data. I was quite surprised when I saw this that even best in class, Lidl has only just over 2/3 of their suppliers with a written supply agreement. So 1/3 of their suppliers without one. Tesco, half of their suppliers without a written supply agreement. And Sainsbury's down at best part of 2/3 of their suppliers without a written supply agreement. So it says that there's either a lot of misconception as to what constitutes a written supply agreement out there, or simply they don't exist. And I think it's possibly more that certainly with people like Tesco, Asda, Sainsbury's, they don't tend to send out something that says written supply agreement as relating to our requirements under GSCOP. So therefore, the written supply agreement you have could be last year's JBP if you had one, last year's terms or this year's terms document that you're about to sign. That can constitute your written supply agreement, which is why my advice on all these sessions, particularly to those of you that are directly account facing and account responsible, is do an audit trail of all the various bits of paper and documents with your customer and try and find out what constitutes your written supply agreement, because it's most likely to be the last significant terms document you did with them, whether that's a JBP or a business plan or a formal terms discussion. That could constitute your written supply agreement.
Andrew,
okay. Yes.
Sorry, just got a quick question on that. So, for example, M&S, they are supplied, their route to market is through Booker. So where there would probably be an agreement between Booker and M&S, but where we would have an agreement for that sits alongside that, is there anything that we need to watch out for potential within GSCOP? So I'm just trying to understand how it all pulls together, given there's almost like a three-way supply agreement.
Who do you do the main supply negotiation with? So does M&S decide with you to list whatever line it is?
Yeah. So they would agree the listing, but then the actual supply would come through Booker.
Yeah, but the terms, so the cost price, any promotional agreements would be between you and M&S.
The cost price isn't.
No.
The cost price is between Booker and M&S.
Booker and M&S.
But okay. M&S can then come for a retrospective request on that.
Okay, so my view would be, obviously both M&S and Booker are covered by GSCOP. So it just depends what part of the terms you're talking about as to whether M&S could be in breach or whether Booker could be in breach. Yeah, so if Booker were to ask for a retrospective payment on the basis of past volume, then it would be Booker in breach of the code, and you'd make a complaint about Booker. If it was M&S demanding money for hospitality, then it'd be M&S in breach.
Yeah.
That makes sense, Lee?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Right.
Andrew, sorry, let me jump in. I'm just conscious of their time. We're due to end very soon. So we need to just check in with these guys whether they want to continue, postpone.
I've got five slides to go.
I'm fine.
Carry on. Yeah, carry on.
Yeah,
I'm okay.
Cool.
Okay. We will send you copies of these slides afterwards. Basically, this is a supply agreement checklist. Okay. So under the code, each retailer must provide either on their website or certainly for public view the following details. So some of the basics, their delisting process, how they handle complaints. Importantly, the name and contact details of the senior buyer, code compliance officer. Very briefly, the code compliance officer is somebody employed by the retailer, normally part of their company secretariat or legal team. So they're separate from the commercial teams, and they are the final point of call before making a formal complaint to the adjudicator. So I think I'll have told most of you last time, the only way of making a formal complaint is to actually go to effectively the buyer's boss and make a complaint about that buyer's actions, which then goes to the code compliance officer. If the retailer can't sort the problem out internally, it can then go to the adjudicator as a formal complaint that could end up with the retailer getting a 1% of their UK turnover fine. But as I said, most suppliers don't go down that route because of the worries of retribution or possible retribution. A much safer route is an anonymous approach directly to the adjudicator. That won't end in a formal investigation, but could end up in the retailer agreeing to change their practice. So I think my advice, and again, please take Stephen's advice if needs be, would be it would have to be pretty serious for you to make a formal complaint that leads to an investigation. And in fact, there haven't been any, to my knowledge, in the 6 years the adjudicator has been in place, other than those that she's decided to start for herself, which was the Tesco and the Co-op one. Final bottom part of that slide, as and when you are discussing terms or a supply agreement, retailers must ensure that you have a copy of the agreement. It must incorporate the code and the requirements of the code. They must take due care when ordering, and they must, in theory, compensate you for forecasting errors if they're not provided in good faith and with due care. Again, in the latest survey, the adjudicator, in the latest survey, the amount of suppliers complaining about forecasting errors is way down. So it seems to be a relatively low on the list of priorities at the moment. Okay. First, the first bullet point on here is the most important one. The biggest single protection you have under the GSCOP code is retrospective actions. They cannot make a retrospective variation of the supply agreement without your agreement and without fair and reasonable notice. So, thinking in particular about terms negotiations, and I know I've had this with a couple of other clients, particularly with Morrison's. Morrison's already just passed their first quarter and still not agreed terms for 2020, 2021 with some suppliers. So the question then becomes, if you do agree terms in June for a financial year that started 4 months prior, is that retrospective? And it's something the adjudicator has made some comments on. An interesting thing to bring into the conversation.
Yeah, I was going to say that was going to be one of my questions. So Booker traditionally, obviously now they're part of this, would never begin a terms negotiation until, so they're in the Tesco financial year, but they'll never begin the discussions till probably May time, which is when they'll go with tier 1, and then tier 2 usually comes in June. So we tend, ordinarily, ours will be signed in towards the end of June. Now, in theory, the date on the agreement we all sign up to, but the funding essentially starts from the 1st of March.
Okay.
I guess it's always been a question of whether that's right or wrong.
Well, has Booker said to you prior to the 1st of March, for practical reasons, we're not going to get a terms agreement in place by the 1st of March. When we do
this year was the first year they probably remembered to. So they did send a note in mid-March. Now, traditionally, they've not normally, I'll be honest, up until this was the first time we've had one this year.
Okay. I think this is where practicality comes in that, do the terms generally work for you?
Depends who you ask. I'd say yes.
You wouldn't have an appetite to, but to damage the Booker relationship by calling them out on retrospective negotiations.
Ordinarily, no. I guess this year might be different given everything that's going on.
Okay, so this is where, in my opinion, you use tactically.
Yeah.
It sounds like, and it would be a discussion to have with other Stephen, it sounds like technically they're negotiating retrospectively. So you technically have an argument. Now, they could possibly throw a whole load of other stuff back, but I think you technically have an argument. I personally, if the negotiation gets a bit sticky, if they're asking for something that you don't particularly want to give, or they're not giving you something that you want, that's when you use it as a bit of a lever. Because all the Booker bars will have now been trained. I know certainly in the early days they were petrified about GSCOP because of the pressure Tesco had put on them. So just dropping into the discussion, you do realise we're doing this negotiation retrospectively, mate. Yeah. Might just swing the balance of power of the negotiation in your direction.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah? Okay. So yeah, do have a think. Anything that's retrospective wants to flag up a big potential red light in your minds. Also make significant changes to your supply chain procedures without reasonable notice. Delaying any agreed payment terms, and probably doesn't affect you, but certainly if you're Gillette, request or require any payment towards shrinkage. Okay, 3 things they can insist on. Okay, so funding for promotions, they can require that you fund promotions, but not predominantly, which in my mind is 50%. So they can't ask you to fund more than 50% of a promotion. They can demand that you pay for promotional feature space, so only linked to a promotion, and they can demand payment for new lines, but only new lines, not second-year lines, third-year line, second-year and third-year listing fees. Only absolutely new lines. Right, final slide, and I think other than retrospective, the most important one, because there's a whole load of things in the code that retailers can only request, they cannot require. So it's very important that you understand what they're requesting and what they're requiring, because you don't have to say yes to request. So payments towards marketing activity. So buyer visits, artwork or packaging design, less relevant for you in a principally branded environment, but consumer market research. So if they're asking you to pay for swathes of dunnhumby research or swathes of AMIA data, that's part of a negotiation. They cannot demand that you pay for that. They can only request or ask. And there's other things there: opening and refurbishment of stores, hospitality, payments for wastage, again less relevant for you. But tying of third-party goods, so dunnhumby and the various data providers would come within that. Again, they have to be careful in terms of any payments between that third-party supplier and themselves. Payment for better positioning, I've put there, we've had the discussion, it is still something that they can request. And again, payment towards the handling of customer complaints. So when you're doing these terms agreements, the important thing is that once it's in the written supply agreement, you will invest 100,000 in dunnhumby research. It's in there, and the request has turned into a requirement. So, go through, when you're doing these terms of negotiation, you're going through them with a fine-tooth comb, being very, very clear what is a request and what they can require. Very few things they can require, that's there, just back a slide. Lots and lots of things they can only request. And final slide. If nothing else, fine-tune your request versus requirement radar. Fine-tune whether what they're asking for is retrospective or forward-facing. Do understand what constitutes your written supply agreement, and are you happy with it? Are you getting reasonable notice? Again, a couple of clients we work with, particularly in fresh foods, this has been incredibly important during lockdown, where retailers have switched off fresh food lines with like 3 days notice, just delisted them, because you probably remember during the panic buying, went down to 4 lines. Interestingly, the adjudicator's been in the press recently saying she's not had a single complaint during lockdown from suppliers saying that retailers have been unreasonable in their changes to supply conditions. It does sound like retailers and suppliers are working together reasonably well during this period. And cost price reductions and growth overrides not explicitly covered or prohibited by the code. So if they are going after you cost price reductions and improved growth terms, those are not automatic breach of the code. It's the way they do it, the notice period that they give you the change of the terms, and whether you feel you're being put under duress whilst you're doing it, i.e. are they making threats? And I think somebody in the audience talked about earlier, Kirsty, did you say, or Stephen, the tone with which they're negotiating?
Yeah, a little bit at the moment. So they're obviously, Tesco are doing a scrape of the discounters on a more regular basis, mainly due to what's going on at the moment, because they feel there's a movement from shoppers back to one big shop versus shopping around. So therefore, there's an increased pressure in terms of pricing versus the discounters from there then. And I think some of the language that's been relayed to me from the team.
Yeah.
But I think there's that, the bit that we may need to pick up afterwards is what you related probably at the start is the difference between GSCOP and then the competition code and just how they can word things. Because I think Kirsty, you've been involved in a couple of those direct conversations, but just how they word it and what they're allowed to say or not say.
So they're quite careful. It's probably a bit of a combination of both the different laws, because they're quite careful in terms of competition law, in terms of how they're wording it, but it's some of the language they're using around some of the impact it might be if we don't get to sort of resolution on some things would then relate to some of the GSCOP stuff as well, I think.
Yeah. I think it's sort of a threat of a delist essentially if there's better pricing elsewhere. If you cut through it, that's what they're saying at the moment. If it's not cheaper in one of Vinny's customers, then I'll look at taking it out.
Okay, and that's where you get into. I mean, technically, you could argue that's a breach of the code. Yeah, because A, it's putting you under duress, and B, they're threatening a delist without giving you clear commercial justification.
Can they do it based on future distribution? So a lot of it's been around future distribution. So if we've been looking for distribution increases, they've said they're not really interested in looking in distribution increases on areas where they're not price competitive.
That is very clever of them. Can you? That's like
they're really skirting around the edges of it.
They can be competitive if they don't want to make 40% margin all the time. So that's their choice.
It's a reverse threat, isn't it? It's quite a good one. That is a really interesting. I mean, is that technically duress? I don't know. I think Stephen may have left the conversation, but I don't think it can be duress. Something you haven't already got isn't a threat, is it?
It's about that limiting, almost trying to limit what you could do with them and what you could grow with them, I think. So I guess that's less of a duress piece.
But I mean, the minute, and it sounds like they will be being careful, the minute they link the negotiation to a retail price, it's just, you do realise we cannot discuss retail price with you, and that is, we're both breaching competition law, even getting into.
Yeah, and I think my advice to the team previously has just been, whenever it gets a bit tasty or you're not quite sure, just say to them, can you clarify what you're actually asking here? Yeah. And almost put it back onto them, because that makes them usually, there's a check step then for them of, shit, have I gone too far? So just put it onto them, that little bit of, can you clarify what are you actually asking here? What do you want me to do?
Yeah.
And that usually stops it a little bit in its tracks then.
Yeah, and
I mean, the rules with the resale pricing to remember are recommending a resale price, fine. Agreeing or setting a maximum resale price, fine. Agreeing or setting a minimum resale price, not okay. And that part of it that's not okay can be tricky because you can have direct or indirect price fixing. So direct price fixing is really obvious. That's just where you say this is the minimum resale price that you're going to sell our products at, and that's either something we're imposing. Can't imagine we get to do that with many customers, but in theory, that would be a direct resale price fixing or agreeing with them a minimum resale price. Indirect price fixing is trickier to spot, but it sounds more along the lines of what we're talking about now, which is when you're getting into conversations about how you maintain their margin, or you're talking about maximum levels of discount they can offer, or offering incentives to stick to a resale price. All of that is definitely wading into murky waters. So that is exactly, Stephen, where you're right to be pointing out to them, or asking that question of what is it you're looking for us to do here, because we can't get into conversations with you about fixing profit margin when that produces a minimum, a minimum resale price. I think that, the conversations they're having where they're saying, look at what discounters are offering, they're trickier because the adjudicator has always been really clear that she is not there to regulate even fairly robust commercial negotiations. So, and even to be honest, a threat to delist might not necessarily be a breach of the code. There are requirements around what retailers have to do if they want to delist. So there's a process that they have to go through, and that's very much prescribed in the code. But if it's an annual plan and every year we're having a conversation about what we can do for them, they are within their rights to be trying to drive us down and even pointing to even pointing to what competitors are doing. And that's probably okay from a code point of view because it's more like robust negotiations, and it's probably okay from a competition law point of view because that's about driving price down for consumers. And frankly, that is all that the Competition and Markets Authority care about. Often suppliers find themselves in pretty unenviable positions, and that was we made submissions about this with the some of the mergers that have gone through or been not gone through. But the Competition and Markets Authority is basically about how do we get choice and price, wide choice and price down for consumers. So from a competition law perspective, it might be okay. Now, obviously, if they're being overly aggressive, then they're putting themselves in danger of being in breach of the code. And if they are actually saying you're delisting us without following the process that the code prescribes, then again, definitely a breach. But it can be more difficult when they're just being sort of robust. And I get that it's difficult. That's grey, when they're stepping over the line from being just robust commercial negotiators to being overly aggressive and not playing with spirit, as was mentioned earlier, of the rules.
Yeah. Okay, that
helps.
And I guess to put a meeting spin on that. If you can catch them out, we'll put them on the back foot. If they act, depending on how experienced the buyer is that you're dealing with, you only need to drop into a conversation. Is that a retrospective requirement? 9 times out of 10, they will back out the door very, very quickly. Stephen's right. If they breach the code, you've absolutely every right to, via Stephen, make and approach the adjudicator. In real life, I would have said 7 or 8 times out of 10, you probably don't need to go that far. Just drop in the odd trigger word, and just restore that balance. They'll know what you're talking about. They'll know not to be quite so heavy-handed, and you might just get that psychological advantage. Okay, Darren, any other questions? I noticed we're over time. But,
we are. If it's good for these guys, then it's good for us. What other questions do you have for Andrew?
I'm just gonna sign out. Sorry, I've got to jump onto another call, but thank you very much.
Thanks, Stephen. Cheers.
Right,
Cheers.
let's go around the room. So I'm just going to do it in order of camera. Vinny, questions or concerns?
No, as I said, is for me, it's a first one. Because I've got Aldi, I've got a Lidl, I've got Iceland. They're all a part of GSCOP. So it's more of Iceland. A few times I have to, because we got a proper written agreement in place with them, I have to refer it, but somebody else helping me out. For me, it's kind of a clarity about everything what we have gone through, because I missed the first one, and then I never being put on. So that's the reason for me. Is everything is kind of new, but a lot of things we've been doing anyway.
Okay. All right. Cool. Stephen, questions or concerns?
No, mine have been covered. I think, like I say, it was the piece about sort of current discussions, and then the Booker terms and the way that they operate from there. Then, so that's probably covered, I think, from there. Just one other thing: does it always have to have a signature on to be valid?
I assume
A
so.
written agreement. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if it's unsigned under basic contract law, it probably is not valid.
Yeah.
But then in these days of electronic transfer, if it's done electronically and it's received on a server, then again, I think it. You'd have to check. For the absolute legality, you'd have to check for Stephen. But I'm pretty sure if it's in electronic form, it's being received on a server, then it would count.
And then you've acknowledged it. Okay, fine.
And I believe that as well. That if it's electronic and it's been sent and received on email, it's got your signature on it.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll just add one thing here. So, for example, we got this Iceland agreement. So it's being signed by me. Has to be by my line manager, and then same thing is by my buyer and his boss. So this is how we scan it, and then they send it the copy.
Yeah.
Or we sign it and send them the scanned copy.
Yeah, no, it was just we've had some fun and games of late with auditors, and I think that's been part of and some of it is from agreements of years gone by where they're obviously then going through it, and we've had a little bit of, if it's not had a signature on it, can they really claim it? And that's something that we've been going back and forth on almost everything now, and we've definitely seen in the last 2 years of working with Booker and Tesco, the need to have a signature on and a date on it has increased massively from their perspective, where it's been a little bit more lax before, I think, but now, absolutely.
All right. Let's come bottom left. Lee, questions or concerns that you leave the room with?
No, I mean, slight question would be around, Andrew referenced Dunnumby a couple of times, and there's instances where Booker have recently moved to using Dunnumby, which has then become a requirement for us to pay for that service, which is...
They can't require it, yeah. It shouldn't be in the terms document, as I've written down.
Yeah, unless it's in the Tesco overarching agreement or the Tesco Booker agreement or the Booker agreement saying AG Barr will provide, will purchase Dunnumby, agree to purchase Dunnumby data, then it's a requirement that you don't need to do.
Yeah.
Again,
so we'll take it out of this year's new agreement that they will put in. We will take it out of, Lee. I've written that down as an action.
Yeah.
So,
all right. Cool. Fair enough.
Doesn't mean we won't pay for it, but we can't have it as a requirement. Yeah. So we don't have it as in the Tesco supply agreement.
Yeah. So decide whether you're willing to spend the money or not. But if you decide to spend the money, get something back in terms of extra listings or a depot gondola end or something in return for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Lee, does that answer your question?
Yeah. We just pretty much answered it. Yeah.
Cool. Peter?
It's a bit broader just because I don't know too much about the background before this call, but what's the process, or what qualifies a retailer as being part of GSCOP? And once they've been nominated to it, is it an obligation to be a member of it, or can the retailer back out? What's the kind of setup around that?
No, it's a good question. Basically, the government decides who is a named retailer, and it's normally anybody with a grocery business worth more than £1 billion.
Right.
So basically, just trawled £1 billion grocery business, came up with the usual suspects. Once you're a named retailer, I don't think, unless your business disappeared. So if Sainsbury's had merged with Asda, the new company would have been one. You won't not be one. and then every so often they have a review of the market and decide that now Ocado should be added or B&M should be added. And it's a legal requirement. You know, once you're a named retailer, you are covered by the law. You can't choose to be a member or not.
Perfect. Okay, doke.
Peter, cool. Kirsty, any questions or concerns for Andrew? No?
No, nothing other than what you've already answered, thanks. For the main one.
Okay, cool. All right, and Hannah? She's off West Canada. Still here? I think she's gone. Sarah, has Hannah gone?
So Sarah's gone.
Everyone's gone. They've all left us. All right. So that brings us to the end. Sorry we overran. What we're going to do next is send you some links that might help. They'll reaffirm some of the things that Andrew said. They'll add a bit more context. They'll add a bit more detail. So we'll send those through. Would that be useful? Send a few links of articles? Yeah,
that'll be good.
We'll send that. It's a bit of reading, but hopefully it just backs up what Andrew said. Andrew, any final words before we let these guys go?
No. Other than, as you know, AG Barr are a ongoing client. So if anything pops up, feel absolutely free to either drop me an email, give me a call, because these things are, they happen in the moment, happen in a meeting. So if you come out of a meeting and you think, what did he or she just say? I'm more than happy to take a call. I'm not exactly busy at the moment, so. As long as you don't mind me taking a call sitting outside on the sun lounger, I'm quite happy.
All right. Okay. Any final questions? Otherwise, we'll let you guys go.
No, thank you. It was good help.
Thank
you. Yeah, thanks very much.
Good.
Bye.
All right. Andrew, shall we
See you later.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Take care.
Cheers. Bye.
Sarah, are you with us?
I am, yeah.
Hello. Hello. We've just got Billy and Kirsty still with us.